Good morning and welcome to the 8th Annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I am Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and I am moderating the Small and Mighty track this morning. Assisting me today is Joy Schwartz from the Winnifox Library System. Thank you, and we are so glad to have you here. Our presenters for this session are Jennifer Stickles, Library Manager of the Salamanca, and I apologize if I said that wrong, Public Library.
Right.
I did okay? Okay, good.
Yeah.
And Tina Dalton, Director of the Cuba Circulating Library in New York. They will be presenting small libraries and the LGBT plus experience. And the other thing I wanted to mention is if you have questions, use your questions panel anytime, and we will save them for the end of the webinar. So Jennifer and Tina, whenever you are ready, go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to share this with you. And we're excited to share what we've learned through the programs we've presented at our libraries. Ooh. Click on it.
So in 1970, the Task Force on Gay Liberation formed within the American Library Association. It then became known as the GLBT Roundtable, and I believe they just changed it to the Rainbow Roundtable. This organization is the oldest LGBTQ professional organization in the United States. And the image here on the screen was taken at the American Library Association convention in Dallas on July 1st, 1970. And we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how long librarians have been fighting for LGBTQIA people.
As part of this presentation, we created a survey to send to other rural libraries. We had 74 responses between our two library systems. Jen works in the CCLS library system, which encompasses 2 counties of New York, and I work in the STLS library system, which encompasses 4 counties of the state. So as you can see here, most of the respondents were directors, and most of them were cisgender female and heterosexual.
One of the questions we asked on our survey was, does your library offer any programming aimed specifically at the LGBTQIA community? So these are some of the responses we got. I suppose the lack of programming about this issue is much like our lack of programming about religion. It's personal, we don't go there, neutral ground. However, I'm sure most of you can agree with me that offering programs for the LGBT community is much different than offering religious-based programs, because I'm sure all of our towns have a place for people of various faiths to go and congregate, whereas most, especially rural areas, don't have a place for LGBT people to go. We do not, as far as I know, we don't have any LGBT staff members, so it's probably because there's no one pushing for it. You know, as we'll talk later, you don't have to be an LGBT identifying individual to run programs for this community. I have not offered LGBTQI programming in our community because of the conservative bend in the community. Well, these are the towns that we definitely should be offering this type of programming in.
So one of the responses we got for this question that we sent out was, we do not have anyone who identifies as such in our community. And I do have permission to share this bit of info from this patron and his mom. So as you can see, this little cutie in the dress here, his name is Finn, and he's been my patron here in Cuba for years, ever since he was a preschool storytime age. And when Jen's library offered Drag Queen Storytime, and these pictures were posted on the library's Facebook page, and also they were in the newspaper, there I see my friend Finn. And I never knew that he was gender fluid before I saw this picture. And why should I? I'm a librarian. He's not obligated to out himself to me or his mom. They don't need to tell me how he identifies for me to know that I need to offer programming for him. So this is just to say that just because you don't know of anyone who identifies as such in your community doesn't mean that they're not there. And chances are that they're your friends, they're your patrons, they're your storytime kids, and they need this kind of support from us, just like all our other types of patrons. So here is the latest statistics we could find on how it kind of breaks down. So you can see in 2017, approximately 4.5% of the population identified as LGBT. So for an example, the Cuba Library has a service population of 4,500, so that would give us an estimated 202 LGBT plus patrons. And Olean, which is where Jen worked at when they did the drag queen story time, serves 14,000 people, so that would be an estimated 630 LGBT plus patrons. To me, that's a large number of patrons. If I suddenly found out I had 200 refugees living in the community, I would for sure be offering programming geared towards serving those patrons. So the same should be true of your LGBT plus patrons.
So one person responded to our survey by saying, no, my question is for you, why? So these are some statistics that might help make you decide if you should offer LGBT plus programs at your library. So 42% of LGBT teens say that the community they live in is not accepting. LGBT youth are twice as likely to be physically assaulted. 40% of gender expansive youth say they are frequently excluded by their peers. And 63% of LGBT youth plan on moving out of their town to find acceptance. And if you work in a rural area like we do, you don't want people moving away. So it's important that we turn our communities into welcoming and accepting areas so that our youth stay here. And if statistics don't help convert you into believing that we need to offer these kind of services, these faces on the screen here are children who either had their lives taken from them or took their own lives because of bullying and abuse that they suffered for either being LGBT plus identifying or being assumed to be. So it's not dramatic to say that, hosting LGBT programs at your library, especially ones for youth, could literally end up saving someone's life.
Another question on our survey was, what is your opinion of libraries offering programs geared specifically at the LGBTQIA community? So we got a variety of answers here. Some were supportive and some not so much. So bravo, libraries are for everyone. We need to make that message bold. Sweet, do it, help me do it. And then we had others, as you can see, if you have programming geared specifically towards the LGBTQIA, then are you going to have programming geared specifically towards non-LGBTQIA? Well, I mean, yes, all our other programming.
Yeah.
If we have programming for Wiccans, then do we have programming for fundamental Christians? And as Jen pointed out, religious programming is not on the same level as LGBTQIA programming. And also we do religious programming in some ways when we have Christmas programming. And then down at the bottom, I believe that they say that they sin because the Bible says so. Well, guess what? It doesn't, even if you believe that they sin, it doesn't matter because you're at work and what you believe about sin doesn't matter when you put on your librarian hat and come to work. So you still need to be providing programming services for all your patrons despite your personal religious beliefs.
So it's very important that while you're working towards making your library more LGBTQI informative and offering new programs, that you properly train your staff so that they can provide good customer service, run those programs, and treat their LGBT coworkers with respect.
One way that we offered some staff training here at the Cuba Library was to collaborate with the Pride Center of Western New York. They're located in Buffalo, which is the nearest city to us. It's about an hour and a half drive from here. However, they were so happy that we reached out to them for this training, and they sent someone down here to offer the training in the community. We collaborated with another organization here in town, and we had over 40 people come from around the county, you know, people from the local university, other nonprofits in town, and this is the type of thing that a library can really do to help their community become more supportive and accepting of the LGBT people in the community.
So one of the things I did at the Olean Library when we started offering LGBT plus programming, you know, we noticed that some of the staff were having some issues interacting with this new large queer-based group of people that we had coming in. So I started sending out emails with like terminology to kind of help them understand some of the terms that they were going to start hearing from their patrons. So cisgender, we used that earlier. Cisgender means that your gender identity and the sex you were assigned at birth match. So like I was assigned female at birth and I identify as that. So I would be considered a cisgender female. Now we use that term because there was a psychiatrist that came up with it, and she basically said, you know, we have the term transgender, but we always seem to label the other. And so if we were going to use terms like trans and transgender, we needed to have a word to identify people whose sex and gender match. So that's where the term cis or cisgender comes from. We also have the term pansexual, which is an individual who has potential to be sexually attracted to people of all sexes and gender identities. Asexual is an individual who generally does not feel sexual attraction or have a desire for intimate relationships. Intersex is an individual who has chromosomes and other traits of more than one sex. And non-binary would be an individual who does not identify as either male or female.
So here are some terms and phrases that you should try to avoid, just in general, but in particular when working with the LGBT community. So avoid the word homosexual or homosexuality because this is aggressively used by anti-gay extremists, and it's considered a diagnosis, and it somehow implies that gay people are diseased or psychologically or emotionally disordered. Avoid the word preference, sexual preference, or gender preference, because a preference indicates that it's a choice and that there somehow could be a cure for it. It's not a preference, it's just who they are. Agenda, gay agenda or homosexual agenda, implies that there's some sort of secret scheme afoot behind the LGBT, you know, lifestyle, and that's not it, of course. They're just regular people motivated by the same hopes and dreams as every other person. Dead naming is when a person comes out or transitions and people refuse to use the new name they pick. So often they will pick a new name that better represents their new identity, and refusing to use their new name or their preferred name is considered hurtful and a form of aggression. And this can be sometimes tricky for libraries because patron names, if they've had their library card since they were 5, now they have a new name that they want to go by. I know that there are library systems out there who are developing policies on how to best deal with this. In our ILS, there's a field for a preferred name. So that's one way to do it. You can just put it in there. You can just change their name. I mean, it's not that big a deal, in my opinion, to just change it to the name that they ask you to change it to. but particularly among staff, if you have a staff member who has asked to be known by a new name or a new pronoun, just respect it. You may not understand why. It doesn't matter. You don't have to understand it. It's just so hurtful if you refuse to do it. So just make sure that you do it. It's just the polite thing, the right thing to do. So when greeting others, you can be mindful of your language and avoid gendered language, such as ma'am, sir, girls, and guys, and try to use more non-gendered language, such as friends, folks, everyone, or if you're from the South, like I am, you can always use the very handy y'all. It's a perfect one to go for non-gendered language.
So let's take some time to talk about your current and future LGBT plus identifying staff members. It's important to make the work environment inclusive and welcoming. So deciding to come out at work is a very personal decision. As a queer person who grew up in a rural conservative area, I've learned how to read people and how to feel out the vibe of a place. So like when I start a new job somewhere, I usually take a few days to kind of figure out my coworkers and the atmosphere of the place I'm working to decide if it's a safe place for me to be open and honest about myself. I've worked at libraries where I was 100% closeted. Nobody knew about my life outside of work. I've worked places where a small handful of people knew how I identified. And at the Olean Library and at the Salamanca Library, where I currently am, I'm 100% out at work. You know, I have my little pride flag on my desk and I wear my pride jewelry, and I don't hide that part of myself anymore. So the one thing I really want you to take away from this part is that it is never, ever your place to out another person, to out one of your coworkers. Just always assume that if you know how a person identifies, that you're one of the lucky few that they felt comfortable coming out to, because they may not be out to all of the staff. And, you know, it's never your place to do that for someone else. So we all know what blatant homophobia or transphobia looks like. But in my personal experience, the biggest obstacle in creating an inclusive workplace are microaggressions. These are comments, questions, or statements that make someone feel different or less than. And often the person saying these things doesn't even realize that they're saying something wrong. They're based on implicit bias and stereotypes and assumptions. Some examples, you know, I've had people, when I come out to them, say like, you don't look gay, like it's a compliment to me or something. Assuming that all queer people know each other. At my old library, one of the supervisors was very happy that she had hired this new staff person and found out that she identified as a lesbian. So she came right up to me and asked me if I knew her. And I did not. You know, not all LGBT plus people hang out together and know each other, even in small towns. And harassment can also be an issue for LGBT people. I had a staff person at one time who attempted to use my identity to their advantage, always trying to act as an ally and be overly supportive and commenting on, you know, anything LGBT plus news related and things like that. But then like behind the scenes, she often did things that were not stuff an ally would actually do, and making comments and to show that she was actually clearly uncomfortable working with an LGBT person. So reporting homophobia in the workplace. It's very important as a staff person or a supervisor to take all claims of homophobia or transphobia seriously. So I'll tell you from personal experience that I put up with a lot of microaggressions before I finally spoke up and made a complaint about being discriminated against in the library setting. it's a very vulnerable position to be put in, to have to sit down, with a supervisor and tell them that there's another employee who's treating you differently or whose statements have made you upset and that, they're clearly being homophobic towards you. It's very uncomfortable for everyone involved in the situation. And because there's this fear that you're going to be treated differently once those accusations come out. And in my case, when I did finally speak up and file discrimination, I was treated differently afterwards. When staff found out, they were upset that I had made these claims about this other staff member. And also the supervisors involved acted differently towards me afterwards, because originally when I filed the first complaint, her immediate supervisor blew me off and said that I took things too personal all the time, and I should realize that general statements against like LGBT people don't necessarily mean that that person has a personal problem with me. And then I went to the assistant director, and told them what had happened in the statements that had been made, and they said the same thing. They said, I was taking things too personal. I have to remember where we work, that it's a conservative area, and not everyone is going to like me or be okay with who I am, and that, I should just try to avoid working with that individual. And then when I finally took it up to the director and told them the statements that had been made, where this individual said that working with an openly queer person made her feel uncomfortable because of her religious views, that she didn't like the LGBT programs we offered, she didn't like the Pride Month book displays, and that she shouldn't have to be around that kind of stuff as a religious person. At that point, the director did take me seriously, and steps were taken to fix the situation. But, so you always have to, no matter how small or big a claim of discrimination is, you really need to follow the appropriate steps and investigate the matter and then take action.
So in New York State, actually those sorts of statements fall under sexual harassment law. And as a director, if you fail to take those sorts of concerns seriously, legal action can be taken against you, against the library, against the board. So that's even more reason, legally speaking, why you should listen to your employees if they come to you with those types of issues. So in 28 states, you can be fired for being lesbian, bisexual, or gay. In 30 states, you can be fired for being transgender. And I mean, currently in the news, we see that even the laws that are in place right now are under attack. And some of these states that have the benefits they do have may be losing them. So hopefully we can, as libraries, be places that stand out as an example in the community for how we can treat our queer employees and patrons fairly. All right, now we're going to shift over to building your LGBT plus collection. So when I first started working at the Cuba Library, we had one book. It was a nonfiction J book, and it said something like, the title was, "So your friend is gay, what should you do now?" And it had a really cheesy cover from the 90s, and that was the only book we had. Now, to be fair, it was a supportive book teaching kids how to deal with having a gay friend. But so the first thing I did when I started here was making sure that each month when I ordered books, I made sure to have something that represented LGBT experience. And so the picture on your left there is our most recent Pride Month display. And then Jen's, why don't you talk a little bit about yours?
Okay. Well, the picture here is from the Salamanca Library. I started there in April, and some of my staff was very excited because of the queer-related programming and stuff that I had become known for at the Olean Library. So as soon as I started, that was one of the first things they were like, are you going to do like pride displays and host lots of LGBT program and have drag queen parties here? And I was like, well, let me ease into this. It's a much smaller, more conservative community. So that June, we did do our very first Pride Month display. I will have to admit, I was a little nervous that we might get complaints. We did not get any complaints at all. And actually, a lot of the books got checked out, and people posted positive things on our Facebook page thanking us for recognizing Pride Month. I'm working on building up the collection there. There was probably like 5 books or something for LGBT people there, no children's books. So I've been working on purchasing more books and adding them to the collection so that it's a more equal representation of the community. And at the Olean Library, once we started getting a lot of LGBT patrons in because of the programming, we actually elected to create a special collections for our queer literature. And at first some people were saying that, by having a special area, we were forcing patrons to out themselves by going over there and selecting books. So what we did to counteract that was you could go to the special collections and pick out something, or if you didn't feel comfortable doing that, you could go and select an LGBT book from the rest of the collection, because we usually had duplicates. We were lucky enough at the Olean Library to be able to afford to purchase duplicate copies and keep one in the queer collection and then one on the regular shelves too. And we found that the books we took off the shelves from the rest of the library and moved over to the new area started circulating. Some of them hadn't been out in like 5 or 6 years, and then once they were put in the new area, they started getting checked out more regularly. It made browsing easier, because sometimes it is hard unless you elect to use spine labels to actually find LGBT materials when they're mixed in with the rest of the collection. So it made it easier for our patrons to actually locate those materials and check them out. So talk about some LGBT programs that you could possibly offer. So the Olean Library, we started the Stonewall Cafe. And what that is, it's a very simple program that I just set up like coffee and cookies and things like that, and invited LGBTQ adults to come in and have like an informal meetup. The first one we did was pretty decent. I think it was like around 20 or so people came in, and I had like a 18-year-old trans girl talking to like a trans woman in her 50s and sharing their experience of transitioning and what it was like to transition later in life versus as a teenager, which was great to be able to see them connect that way, because otherwise they never would have like met each other or been able to share those experiences. They still run the Stonewall Cafe. It's run by a volunteer now since I've left there. So it's still going on. And like I said, it's a very easy program. It barely costs anything to do. Sometimes we would pick like a topic to chat about, but it was pretty much just run by the patrons that came in. LGBT programming for teens. We had a Gay Straight Alliance at the Olean Library. That started back in February 2017. The Teen Advisory Board requested it. The local school district would not allow them to have a Gay Straight Alliance at school. So they were hoping that the library could kind of fill that gap for them, which we did do. The first meeting, we had about 30 LGBT plus teens come. And once they realized that the Olean Library was a safe place for them, they started coming every day after school, and not just when we had the GSA. I mean, we were so overrun with teens at one point, we applied for a grant and opened up a special teen room after school just so they had someplace to go and hang out. At the Oleans GSA, we would start each meeting with like a 10-minute conversation about queer history, because that's not something they're taught in school. We would talk about an important moment or person in history, and I started doing that because I remember the first time I mentioned the word Stonewall, and they thought I was talking about Stonewall Jackson and not the Stonewall riots. And then I was just like, you have to know your own history, and you have to know who came before you so that you can actually have a gay straight alliance and who did the work. And so then after we do like the history lesson, then it's a pretty general like support group. Basically, we sit in a circle and the teens just get to talk about their lives with other people their age that understand where they're coming from. And then I just would facilitate the conversation and make sure that they stayed on track.
So at the Cuba Library, we also had a teen group that met somewhat regularly. And it ebbed and flowed as far as how many teens were coming to it. I applied for a mini grant through our library system, and we received it. So that was one of the ways we funded having this teen group. And we used the grant to take the teens up to the Buffalo Pride Parade this past year. We had a member of the community who volunteered to help lead the group, and she grew up here in Cuba, so I felt like she was a really good one to speak to growing up in a rural community as a queer person. And she was great with the kids. As you can see in these pictures, they're just so happy. All day long, they would turn to me and say things like, look how many of us there are. And I'm just so happy. I feel so happy here among my people. It was just a wonderful opportunity for them to go to this fun-filled day and see how many people identify as them and also celebrate their life and just have fun. We did have to jump through a few hoops, check with our insurance company and make sure we were covered and get permission slips from the family. So I would make sure you cover your bases in that respect. But it was a really wonderful opportunity for the library to get behind this and help the teens have a fun-filled day. And I had a fun-filled day too.
All right, so offering queer programming for your children and families, this is where your patrons and community might start to get a little nervous or upset. So we did a rainbow story time at the Olean Library, and that was basically a story time, just like any other story time program, but we exclusively read books that featured LGBTQ families or characters. We read the story The Prince and the Knight. If you haven't read it, you should. It's adorable. It's about this prince and his parents want him to get married. So they introduce him to all these women, and for whatever, unknown reason, he doesn't hit it off with any of them. And then he's traveling back one day home after some of his meetings, and there's a dragon, and he's fighting the dragon, and he almost is like defeated, but then this knight comes out and rescues the prince, and then he takes the helmet off, and it's like this handsome knight, and they fall in love and get married. It's very sweet. I remember when I was reading it at the first Rainbow Storytime, there was a grandmother who very clearly did not realize that it was not your traditional storytime program that she had brought her granddaughter to, until we got further into that book and she started to notice the theme of what was happening. And I just remember her granddaughter sitting real close to me on the floor watching, and when I showed them the wedding between the prince and the knight, she just turned around to her grandma and was like, they love each other. And it was so sweet, and to see her just instantly accept, this pairing. And that's why, you should include, if you're not going to do like an exclusively LGBT story time, you should make sure to include LGBT books on occasion, because children who don't come from families that have queer relatives or anything, they don't have any kind of exposure to these types of relationships. So when they go to school and then they meet someone who has two moms or two dads, it's this shocking experience for them that they don't understand, and that's how bullying can happen at young ages. But if they're exposed to families that are different than their own, they're going to be more accepting. They're going to be less likely to bully that child in school. And so it's a good thing to start to introduce them to at a young age. And plus, of course, it's a good experience for kids who do come from families that have two moms or two dads, because they get to see themselves represented during story time. Okay, drag queen story time. This is the fun portion here. So I still, to this day, I'm always going to blame Tina for this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So back in, it would have been like April 2018, Tina sent me an email asking if I wanted to go in on a hula hoop performance for summer reading with this guy named Benjamin Barry. So I went to his website to check him out, and I was very excited because when I got to his website, I discovered that not only does he do a really awesome hula hoop, he also is a fabulous drag queen. And I had read all the, different articles and heard about libraries that offer drag queen story time, and I just loved it. I thought they were fabulous, and it looked like such an amazing experience. And we had been doing Pride and like LGBT programs at the library for about a year at that point, and with no big complaints. So I thought it was safe and that it was time to try that at our library. So I got a hold of Ben and invited him down, and he said yes, that he would love to come to our library and do drag queen story time for us for Pride Month in June. So we received our first complaint via email on June 11th, basically just saying like that they were outraged and disappointed. And then like 2 minutes later, another email came through, and that was just the beginning of it. People got real comfortable saying some really awful things on Facebook. It was kind of a mob mentality. Once that first person kind of crossed the line and said something inappropriate and no one called them out on it, then everyone else felt comfortable doing the same. As you can see on the screen, things got rough for a while. I mean, we received thousands of comments on our Facebook page, and normally we'd get like 3 or 4 comments on something when we posted it. And this just took off and became, went viral in our community and the surrounding communities. And so the, comments became very shocking at times. And so we received all these like crazy emails and phone calls. People came in person. I had a local pastor that came in person and like got right up in my face and called me a demon and said I was going to burn in hell and that I was forcing my lesbian agenda on the children of the community, and that God would rain down fire and brimstone upon the library and make sure this program never took place. I had other patrons that would corner me and tell me just exactly what they thought of LGBT people, and it wasn't a good thing. Luckily all the staff kind of pulled together during that and supported me and each other during this. And then, as you can see here, I love this image coming this Wednesday at the Olean Library, Drag Queens versus Nazis. So Daniel Burnside is the regional director of the National Socialist Movement, which is the largest Nazi group, neo-Nazi group in the United States. He lives about an hour from Olean. He reached out and was trying to gather other people to come and protest the library hosting this event, because, of course, he was against it. He posted a lot of things on Facebook. So did his wife, Sabrina, who's a much scarier person than Daniel. Excuse me. So we had religious organizations in the community against us. We had just regular patrons. We had people from outside of the area that were finding our Facebook. And now we had Nazis that were threatening to protest the library. But it wasn't all bad. So while dealing with all the negativity and the harassment and people threatening to burn down the library, and threatening to come to the library and chop up their library cards, or, you know, even got to the point where the night before the program actually took place, we found out that there had been death threats against me. But in between all of this, there was positive stuff happening too. We were getting really positive messages from patrons within our community, parents of the kids that came to the Rainbow Alliance, librarians especially, you know, were posting supportive comments on our Facebook page and reaching out to us. I mean, I even one day took a phone call from a woman in Texas who said that she'd been at the gas station and she overheard some people talking about this crazy little small town library that was dealing with Nazis because they wanted to have a drag queen come. So she went online, found out that it was us, called us to tell us that the people in Texas supported us. Probably not all of the people in Texas, but she did. She called, took the time to actually call us and say that she was thinking of us and was supporting us from afar. So the day of the event, we did have protesters, like 12, actually followed through. The police forced them off to the side. They had their signs and everything, but they kept them away from the front doors so that when the families came in, they didn't have to like walk right next to the protesters. We ended up having 9 police officers there that day for security. At first, the local police force told us they would not provide protection and that we should just cancel the event. But after receiving some pressure, they finally did send over police officers in uniform and undercover to provide security that day. And then these are the supporters. So the police estimate that there was around like 450 people at the library that day, which is definitely the biggest library program I've ever managed to pull off. Oh, sorry, someone was calling in. So out front of the library, people started showing up around 3 o'clock, and the program wasn't until 6:30 that night. They had pride flags. They even had a picnic in the park after the event took place and went and had a cookout. We had people from Buffalo and all over that came down to show their support, whether they were there for the actual event and participating in it, or they were just there because they wanted to show that they supported the LGBT community and that they supported the library for pushing forward with the event. Some more pictures from that day. Some of the other drag queens that worked up in Buffalo that knew Benjamin came down and dressed up and just kind of walked amongst the supporters to entertain them while they waited for the actual storytime program to take place. The one in the middle is probably my favorite, of the little baby holding the little pride flag. I love that photo. And there's Finn from earlier. So the room that we had the program in, it's only supposed to hold 45 people, but we managed to fit like 100, 150 people in that room. They were sitting pretty close to each other, but they fit. As you could tell from the faces of the kids, they thoroughly enjoyed the event. You know, so I just say, like, how can you protest like these smiles and think there's anything wrong with what's happening in that room? And there is Benjamin, otherwise known as Flolita. She read a couple of children's books, Jacob's New Dress and Morris Micklewhite and the Tangerine Dress. Did lip sync to Frozen and answered some questions from the kids and stuff like that that came and participated in the event. All in all, I think it was probably my favorite program and most successful program I've ever done, and I don't think I'm ever going to top it. So, and these here on the screen are just some comments that came after the fact. So, the Olean Library received an award from the Western New York Library Resources Council for Program of the Year for the Drag Queen program. I got interviewed for BuzzFeed News, which was pretty amazing. So there's a great article called "Some Libraries Are Facing Backlash Against LGBT Programs and Holding Their Ground" that they included a lot of librarians across the country that had offered various LGBT themed programs, and we got to be included in that article. So I recommend you go check it out. There's a lot of great stories and information in there. And so, but interesting, after that got posted, then of course I had people finding me on Twitter and saying things like the librarians deserve death along with the drag queens. And so every once in a while I'll get those kind of like messages and stuff like that where people will be like, oh, you're the one who did that, and then they'll contact me and say something awful, but you get used to it, so it's fine. It's not fine, but it's fine.
So after we'd been doing this type of programming for about a year, we did a survey of our patrons who'd been involved with it. Have you experienced any positive changes or experiences as a result of these programs? And these are some of the comments we got back. As you can see, they're all great comments. A big one is they met new friends. The community's becoming more educated and accepting. They had fun, a chance to be in a new social group and get information about different programs. Another question we asked was, do you think these programs have resulted in any changes in the community overall? And once again, very positive feedback from our patrons. The sense of community has blossomed. It's provided education. It's given us a safe space to connect with others. It's shown that the community as a whole is quite supportive. And these are just such good comments for a program. And I know any program that I would hope to host at the library, I would love to have this sort of outcome as a result of that programming. And I will just say before we go to questions that the ripple effect from Oleanne hosting that drag queen story time was quite profound. One of the people who was commenting and negative comments in the Facebook page turned out to be the high school's Title IX officer who LGBT kids were supposed to go to when they faced harassment at school, right? And so it came out in the public forum that that Title IX officer was anti-LGBT as well. So it resulted in her getting reassigned in her position. And so the kids at the high school were given someone who would actually listen to them. And as a result, the high school now, right, has the Gay Straight Alliance?
They do, yep, they have a GSA now.
Yeah, whereas before, no one at the school would let them have it. Another thing that came about as a result is a local group, the local, tell me the name of it again.
The Cattaraugus County Pride Coalition.
Yeah. So they had been formed beforehand, but they weren't active. It was kind of just like a non-group, just with a name. But after this drag queen story time, they became very active, and they hold Pride celebrations every year. And I went to the Pride picnic this past year, and it was just massive. There were so many people there, and they had a drag queen competition or drag king competition as well. And it was just great to see in our very red, very small, rural, conservative community, all these people who are out there supporting each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for us. Thank you for listening, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Tina and Jen. We do have a couple of questions, and the first one goes back to the terminology that you were talking about in the beginning. The question is, sometimes you say you're lesbian and sometimes queer. Is there a difference between those two terms? What's the...
Yes, there is. So I identify as queer. Most people say lesbian or that I identify as a lesbian, but that's not fully accurate. So queer to me, it's an umbrella term, which means that it can encompass lesbians, gay people, bisexuals, pansexuals, asexuals, anyone not straight, basically. So I like to use the word queer because I believe that sexuality is fluid and that it can change over time. You might become interested in different things or meet someone that's not someone that you previously thought you would have been interested in pursuing a relationship with. And so I just think that queer, it doesn't box, it's not a little tiny box like the term lesbian or the term gay that would, make it seem like that's only what you're interested in. But I like the term queer because it encompasses all the various identities within the LGBT community.
Ah, okay. Thank you. That makes sense. And I appreciated hearing the definitions that you talked about in the beginning, because that's something that I don't know a lot about yet either. So thank you for sharing those as well. The next question is, how did you prepare the staff and board for the drag queen story time? Or did you meet any resistance from board members?
Surprisingly, because right before the drag queen program happened, I had board members that were questioning my paranormal programs, because I had a Bigfoot expert come to the library and a ufologist, and they were very fun programs. And there was a board member that was kind of upset about it and said that he didn't think it was appropriate for a library to be offering like pseudoscience. And so when the drag queen program happened, I was like, this is going to be the one board member that's going to have a problem with it. And he didn't. Yeah, I guess drag queens are real, so he didn't have a problem with it. But no, the board was very supportive during it. They never once brought up the idea of canceling the event or backing down, even when we lost a very large organization in the area that usually made a financial donation every year. They stopped because of the drag queen program. Even when we were losing donations like that, they did not ask me to stop the program. All of the board members were in attendance the night of and showed their support to the library in that way. And we just made sure that the staff was kept updated, sending out emails. We wrote a public statement so that the staff all knew how to respond if myself or the director wasn't in the library at the time, so that they could handle any issues. But no, we had full support from within the library for the program.
That is awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And the next question, what steps do you recommend for creating programming for adults similar to the Stonewall Cafe you mentioned? I'm new to my small community and I'm curious how you were able to get connected.
So for the Stonewall Cafe, that idea came about because we had the Rainbow Alliance, we had the Gay Straight Alliance for teens, and I actually had a couple of adults come up to me and say how they had wished we'd offered something like that when they were a teenager, because there isn't anything, unless you wanted to go to the very poorly done local drag shows, there was nothing for the LGBT community for adults in the area. And so once they said something, I was like, well, then we should fill that gap too and offer something for the adults. So I did the first one. I advertised it just like any other program that we did at the library, Facebook, Twitter, the newsletter, the newspaper, and just hope that people actually would show up for it. And they did. We had a pretty good turnout for the first one. And like I said, it's still going on at the library and meet once a month. But it was just, they were aware by that point that we were an LGBT, friendly library, because we'd been offering the program for the teenagers. And so they knew it was a safe space for them to come to also as adults.
Similar to that, when we've held programs geared towards LGBT community, we've just advertised it in the newspaper and on Facebook and all the ways we would any other program. And yeah, it's worked. We've had people come out, and sometimes you worry if you put something on social media that it's gonna blow up, kind of like Drag Queen Storytime did. But we've not experienced any problems like that with our own advertising. So.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just answering another question. We have a question, and I'm trying to figure out what it's referring to. It's did people turn out to inform themselves and learn? So I'm not sure if she's referring to the Stonewall Cafe or to, oh yeah, she says to the Stonewall Cafe. So did people turn out to inform themselves and learn in addition for that program?
No, I think everyone that came was a part of the queer community, and they came to, I think, just mingle and meet people in an environment that wasn't like a bar atmosphere, you know, and get to know other people within the community. And it wasn't really an educational based like program. It was more just creating a safe environment for people to just sit and talk and get to know each other instead.
We showed the PBS documentary of the Stonewall riots this past year for Pride Month, or it would have been 2019. But and that was we had a good turnout for that, and that was definitely an educational program, and we had not just queer patrons who came to it as well. So you can definitely have educational type programs around this if you choose to. You know, the history of, I've seen libraries that have done like drag queen makeup tutorials just for fun with their teens. There are opportunities for informative type programs if that's what you'd like to see at your library.
Excellent, thank you. And Sarah has a comment. Your social media policy may allow you to mute people, which if you are using a social media archiver, you are not likely violating your open records policy. So, and just a comment about social media and muting people and archiving things. Thank you for that, Sarah. We've got just a couple minutes left. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can fit them in before we, excuse me, before we close at 11:30. Thank you again so much for all of this information and all the stories that you shared and whatnot. That was, it was, as a librarian, I was wanting, you know, supporting you all the way, and I'm sorry you had to go through all of the the hard things that you had to go through. So thank you so much for sharing those stories. Any other last minute questions from anyone? Give another minute or so. So what next programs are you working on?
That's a good question. We're working on the annual report right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Here too, yes.
Yeah. I am thinking we haven't done any LGBT programs at Salamanca yet because I wanted to pass probation first. But I am looking into options of starting a PFLAG chapter for our county. We don't have one in Cattaraugus County. So I've contacted them to see about what I need to do to start a chapter here so that we can then have PFLAG meetings at the Salamanca Library and kind of start easing into offering programs for the queer community now that the people of Salamanca have gotten to know me and are used to me. Before I wanted to wait, like I said before, I just dived in the deep end and, you know, had a drag queen at the library like day 2 of my employment there. So
Yeah.
we're easing.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other additional questions come in, so I think we'll go ahead and close it just a minute or so early. So thank you so much, Jennifer and Tina, for a great session today.
Thank you for having us.
And one comment just came in. Lisa says, just wanted to say bravo. No real change is created without resistance. So bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you. As mentioned, the session recording and slides will be posted on our conference website by January 24th. Our next session in this track is Displays on a Dime with Casey Garner, or at 1 p.m. From Participation Trophies to Retire Already. Best Practices in Managing a Multi-Generational Staff is the other program this afternoon at 1 o'clock. We hope to see you at one of those. And if not, we hope you have a great rest of your day.